There's a battle of the Japanese content creators abroad in Japan, or Chris Broad versus Oriental Pearl. We're going to get into today on The Legal Mindset. We teach you to be your own judge. I'm Andrew Esquire, American attorney living in Asia. And this is a fast facts version, the quick and dirty version of the latest in legal news. If you like this, make sure to like the video, leave a comment on what you think about this topic. So let's get right into it with this battle. This is one of particular interest to me because, well, it's in Asia and it's involved in a topic which I happen to know a little bit about, having been really a frequent visitor to Japan. I've spent significant time there, and I have friends that are living there, as well as friends that are content creators there that make Japanese content. Now, I will say none of my friends are part of the social circle of either Oriental Pearl or Chris Broad abroad in Japan, which is perfectly fine. Not everybody has to hang out, guys. It's perfectly fine. But it does give me some insight into what's really going on there in Japan and giving a realistic assessment of the country in 2025 that isn't tainted by people's particular political positions or their particular opinions or their particular content, which might require them to have a certain position on Japan. So let's get into that today. So for those who don't know, there has not been anything filed, but if this was a case, the defendant would be Chris Broad. He'd be party number one here of Abroad in Japan, a channel with over 3.28 million subscribers, 321 videos. He labels himself the happiest British guy making videos in Japan. I will say, and once again, I have nothing for or against any of these parties, but I will say in terms of Abroad in Japan's content, it's content that for me as somebody that lives here in Asia is now a little bit and has visited Japan frequently. It's now very remedial. It's information that I really don't need or already know, or it's overly simplistic, which mainly was more useful before I'd ever come to Asia. I did watch some of his content before I'd ever visited Japan as just somebody who thought about coming to Japan. And that's when it was the most interesting to me. But as somebody who actually lives here, now it's kind of lost its content value. But once again, nothing personal against him at this point. Party number two, plaintiff, I actually hadn't heard of before this conflict, which was Oriental Pearl. Now, she is by no means a small channel, much bigger than mine actually, with 1.4 million subscribers and actually more videos that are up than Abroad in Japan, 514, labeling herself a professional language nerd living in Asia for 13 years, kind of part of the polyglot sphere, right? And of course, I believe the identity here is Alyssa Studebaker. So what are their opening arguments? What are the arguments that both of them are making? Well, Oriental Pearl is arguing that Chris Broad, abroad in Japan, potentially committed defamation by misrepresenting her interaction with the homeless as laughing at them or mocking them rather than the genuine context of fleeing awkward sexual harassment.
In this situation, while she's filming, a homeless guy calls her over to talk to her. They talk for a bit, and this is how the conversation ends.
どういう意味ですか? どういう意味?
お前ら、シャバラ夜やるんか、セックスオンリー。2万円。
2万円っていう。
2万円やらせろ、俺に一発今日。
何買うんですか?
お前よ、バカ野郎やらせろ一発。
No. Oh my gosh, this is a rough area.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. ちょっとやばい話です。
おい、こら。Small.
Yeah, 大丈夫です。
So the audio that Chris used comes from her talking to a homeless person, and the clip of her laughing is actually her laughing uncomfortably because she was being sexually harassed. Chris decided to cut that up and put it with different B-roll to make it look like she was laughing at homeless people. I mean, that kind of sounds like defamation, buddy.
You know, once again, it's a very awkward situation he gets into. She was essentially propositioned. Now, is that, something that doesn't happen other places in the world? No. Growing up in Miami, I remember walking in certain neighborhoods in the club areas or downtown, et cetera, and you see a woman walking in a dress and a guy pull up in a Lambo and essentially ask how much, and sometimes the girl would, yell and scream, and sometimes she'd get in the car, and I see that in a lot of different places, a lot of different situations. There's a lot of places here in Asia where there's certain roads, you walk out on the road and you might get a question as to whether or not you're working or not. That's something that does happen, and it happens everywhere in the world. But it's not something, once again, that's necessarily comfortable. And certainly you're entitled to, if someone propositions you like that, to feel not just awkward, but perhaps angry, perhaps indignant. That's a very normal reaction to that. And to laugh awkwardly would be one way of coping with that interaction. Chris Broad's argument about Oriental Pearl, his kind of counter argument is Pearl was misrepresenting the homeless situation, the overall situation in Japan, kind of saying it's worse than it really is. And large content creators deserve a degree of scrutiny and correction. Misconstruing reality deserves to be called out. Now, actually, I will say I sympathize with part of the argument here because, as we'll see, and I'll present the evidence, there is a lot of essentially misrepresentation on the internet about the situation in Japan. People paint Japan as if it's as bad as Western cities, as if it's, LA or Chicago or London, etc. It's not, right? And that objectively, I can just say, as a basic opening argument, that is a convincing one on its own. Now, we're going to get into what was actually done and whether or not that makes that okay, right? The evidence here, and the primary evidence, as you're going to see, is a video where essentially there was a defamatory depiction of Oriental Pearl, which, despite blurring, it's obvious we know who this is. It's alluded to who this is.
A rather ominous sounding video called "What is Happening to Japan?" It wasn't just the title and thumbnail that were ominous, but the description reading, "Is Japan cooked? I've seen a lot of changes and things seem to be getting worse."
And obviously this is Oriental Pearl, right? There's not really another person that would fit that description with the blur even. It's not really going to change things. And well, I will say one reason for the blur is also because of Japan's privacy laws, right? So without somebody's consent to be featured, there is a legitimate legal issue as to putting them in a video, which will come up later when we review issues that Oriental Pearl may have herself. So, but what was defamatory is saying that she was mocking the homeless when indeed it was a different interaction. That can certainly damage somebody's reputation, particularly if they're taking offense at the less fortunate. And the legal standard in Japan is quite low for defamation. You have to understand, it really is three simple elements. Defamation in Japan is a public allegation. So online is public. So it doesn't have to be in a paper or said in person in the public square. Online counts as public. So check mark there. An allegation of facts, it's implying a fact, not an opinion. Saying she's laughing at the homeless is a matter of fact. Either she was doing that or not. It's not an opinion. It's not, well, she should think this, or, well, this is a bad political take. It's saying, no, this happened. So that would presumptively be a check mark there. The third would be defaming somebody's reputation, objectively lowering their social standing or honor. And honor is a key one here. And you could say this definitely would impinge upon her honor. You might say her social standing may or may not be affected, but honor certainly would be, as being negative towards the less fortunate is a dishonorable thing. Now, one important thing for Japan is truth is not a defense. Unlike in America, where truth is a defense, it is not, unless a very narrow exception applies. Now, this is a very important exception. There's a public interest exception under Article 230-2, which states if, once again, all three elements of this defense are met, if the statement relates to a matter of public interest and is made solely for the public benefit and the facts are proven to be true, it's a defense, right? Now it's what's called an affirmative defense. So you have to go to court. You have to say, okay, yes, I did this, but there's a reason out of it, right? There's a reason out of it. And then you might get out of it. That would cover mainly stuff like news, etc., reporting on a crime or a criminal case. That will be a clear matter of public interest. So that's there. We also have to mention, before we do a more analysis on this and render our judgment, there are other facts at play. And these are non-legal factors, but they're factors that do need to be disclosed because it goes to the motive behind this and also whether or not they'll ultimately come through with a defamation claim or other legal claims. The first is there's definitely political dynamics. Look, Chris Broad is clearly left-leaning. He's very anti-Trump. He has a Western partner, and that all plays in. Once again, you are the result, you are the effect of the people that you're around. So his social circle, which includes people like Connor and Trash Taste, which obviously had Hassan on, is more left-leaning. And that's a part of him coming out of the JET program and the teaching program in Japan. If anybody has any experience with that, the teaching programs, both in Japan, also in Korea, which I have some experience with, are heavily left-leaning. Teaching as a profession is heavily left-leaning, and that gives you particular opinions about folks. And Pearl is appearing, once again, she appears right-leaning. I don't want to put that on her as I can't read into her personal politics. She does appear to be religious, right? And she does have a Japanese partner, which would give a different perspective, once again, on how things look, right? If you have a Western partner, well, things might not look so bad compared to the West. If you have a Japanese partner, well, they might say, be a little bit more stringent, right, on how things are and might have a different view. You also have a battle between content creators. Now, this is always interesting for me in these internet fights because it draws interest when content creators clash. And every time we have a content creator on content creator battle, I have to ask myself, is this a genuine conflict or is this all a kayfabe? Is this all just an act? Is this all just something to drum up interest or drum up drama? Because for some creators, particularly smaller creators, it is a great way to punch up by creating drama with a larger creator and getting them to react and engage with you. So I always have to ask myself this, but it does appear that there's some genuine legal basis and some genuine power behind at least some of these claims. Now, both are big YouTubers, but Chris is bigger. And I have a rule I call the David versus Goliath rule. It's never really smart for people to punch down. And what I think was a critical error on the part of Chris Broad was, despite the fact that both of them are large, prospectively punching down at Pearl as the larger, more seasoned, more well-known creator. It does appear to be punching down from that David versus Goliath perspective. Also, there's a big difference in the portrayal of Japan, and this plays into it and plays into a little bit of my analysis here, which is many influencers profit by misleading ignorant Western weebs and Japan lovers with images of Japanese decline. Japan has major issues, but mass immigration and rampant homelessness akin to the West are not they're not major issues in Japan. I'm sorry to say, it's just something that a lot of people, particularly on X and particularly on other social media platforms, YouTube included, are attempting to paint Japan as having some massive problem with mass immigration and et cetera. They don't. That is a factual dishonesty. And I can say that, saying that other countries indeed do and do need to correct some of these problems. Japan is not amongst those. As a percentage, it is a fraction of a percent. And the populations are largely not of the populations that are coming to America or the West. They're largely Asian populations, such as Chinese, Korean, et cetera, Philippines, Vietnam. They're not majority from the Middle East or majority from South America or Central America. That's just not Japan. And any account or any profile trying to paint that as a major thing is wildly overplaying the problems in Japan and the issues in Japan. And one thing to be noted is there are, and I'm not saying Oriental Pearl is one of them. In fact, she made a very funny joke about being a Russian agent, but there are foreign powers that are attempting to influence the dialogue and influence this dialogue specifically in order to create divisiveness within countries. So you do have to be wary that certain countries have a vested interest in dividing the country over these non-issues, over things that are really non-issues in the country. So just be aware of that. That is a real thing. So real Japanese problems that Japan does have that are real are, for example, the government gross debt, percent of GDP. They've got a debt that's almost 250% of their GDP, the highest public debt in the world. That's a real problem. Roughly 30% of their population is elderly, right? That is an extreme problem. These are real problems that Japan has. Once again, much different than mass immigration or much different. Now, there is a counterclaim that I want to bring up before we come to our judgment about Pearl. And one thing that was brought up to me, and this is a very important thing for content creators, particularly nuisance streamers, which may be hit with this in the future, is Japan's privacy laws require consent before you film people. Now, many Japanese just let it slide. They just let it go. They kind of are very relaxed about that. But one thing that came up that was potentially problematic is I noticed, and other content creators did notice, that Pearl was filming children apparently without their parents' consent or really any consent of their guardian or anybody who was in charge with them. That is a potential violation of a privacy law, which, once again, although the Japanese rarely enforce it, she's a long-term resident and she should indeed know better. And in fact, in the future, she could be hit with claims over doing stuff like this. And these are some of her biggest videos. So once again, if you're a Japanese long-term resident, you're living in that country, you should learn the privacy laws and try to respect them and ask for consent. So my judgment here is that Oriental Pearl indeed does have a potential defamation case against Chris. So if she did truly want to bring it, she does have it. Japan's very permissive regarding defamation. However, in reality, defamation is probably not worth it. It's going to be costly. It's going to take a long time. There's a lot of procedure. She does have a burden of proving it. And there could be reputational backlash against her for going through with the lawsuit, perhaps within the Japanese community. Now, Chris Broad does have potential to win a public interest defense. So he could argue that, hey, I'm doing this to show and disprove overall the homelessness in Japan and prove that this is not an issue, it's a non-issue, it's in the public interest to show it's a non-issue. He might be able to sneak through with that, but the problem is the core of the defamation is related to her laughing at the homeless. It's not at her general misrepresentation. It's saying, hey, she was mocking the homeless when really she was being harassed, right? So I think while that's plausible, it's not bulletproof. And that's why I don't think either one of them wants to take this thing to trial. Other arguments, once again, that Pearl needs to be careful of Japanese privacy law and violations of future content. And everyone should be aware that Japan is being overly portrayed as falling apart by social media, YouTubers, and X, and the misrepresentation is genuinely misleading ignorant Westerners, weebs, etc. And many of you that just don't know. And it's not your fault that you don't know, but you should be educated by those that have actually been there and actually seen Japan, not those that may want to portray it in a certain way. But guys, what do you think? What do you take? What do you think? Chris Broad, Oriental, Pearl, neither, both? Let me know in the comments. I'll catch you on the next.